Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. I am Carolyn Byers. I'm the Education Director at Madison Audubon Society, and usually I'm out in the neighborhood teaching kids at schools and community centers. But even though Wisconsin is opening up a little bit right now, we're trying to maintain social distancing, keep everybody safe, and bring you all kinds of awesome lessons online, which is great because you don't have to go anywhere. All right, so I'm going to be talking about animal tracks today, but before I get to that, I just want to say for anyone new out there, we have all kinds of lessons and activities and games on our website, madisonaudubon.org, and find the Safer and Funner webpage page under there because, that's where we're keeping all of our cool stuff to help you engage with nature while you are home. And also all summer because it's almost summer. I know a lot of kids in Wisconsin are finishing up school this week, and that is awesome. Congratulations, everybody, for making it through this wild spring and all of the virtual learning that happened. So congrats. Welcome to summer. So the other thing I want to mention is that registration for our virtual summer camp is open now. So we're going to drop a link in the comments for that too, and you can check it out. The whole camp is free, and there is no need to register if you just want to participate in the camp. But we do have a Super Explorers Club that's going to give kids more FaceTime with me and the amazing intern that we have, and a chance for kids to talk to each other too. So if you want to be in the Super Explorers Club, now's the time to register for it. What else do I want to see? I'm checking my comments over here on my computer because it is hard for me to see them on my phone. Okay, so let's see. Today we are going to be talking about animal tracks. And the thing that I love about animal tracks is that they let you be an animal detective, a nature detective, because you can know that animal was there and about how long ago it was there without ever seeing them. And so it's really cool because there's a lot going on in our neighborhoods and our cities when we're all asleep. Lots of animals come out then. And so it's really neat to know what's going on when we're not able to see it. So I think animal tracks are really fun to learn about. I'm going to be doing 8-minute notes again at the end of our lesson. So if you have a nature journal, you can grab that. If you just want to bring a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, that's good too. All right, let's see. Checking comments. Beautiful. Thank you, Brenna, for adding those links into our comments. All right, so I really love animal tracks. I also, there's a few other ways you can tell if animals are there without seeing them. You can listen for them. So birds make a lot of noises. It's very easy to listen to them and know that they're around you. And if you get really good at it, you can tell which birds are there just by listening to who's singing. A lot of other animals make noises too. I have heard coyotes and foxes yipping. I've heard deer snorting, which is a really interesting sound that before I heard it the first time, I didn't know that they did that. So it was a little startling. What else? I hear chipmunks squeaking at me from my garden. I hear lots of squirrels making that really raspy call where they go up in the trees. So sound is a really good way to know that animals are there. You can look for fur or feathers that animals drop, or if that gets caught on things like barbed wire fences or on thorny bushes. You can look for poop. I think we did a lesson on animal poop a little while ago. You can check that out. But tracks are really neat because they kind of give you a little window into what the animal was doing. You can look at just 1 or 2 footprints to try and figure out which animal it was, but you can also look at the whole track to see what the animal was up to, if it was walking or running, or if it jumped over something, or maybe if it stopped to pause and look or sniff at something. You can get a lot of information about the path that the animal was taking from the tracks. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about when you're trying to identify a track is just the shape of the track, because there's a lot of different groups that you can sort of put animal footprints into that help you narrow down who you're looking at. And I have these really neat rubber tracks that I'm going to share with you. And first I want to explain a little bit about these tracks. So they're a replica of the animal footprint, not the animal's foot. So if this animal had been walking, it would leave a print in the ground, all right? And so that print, sort of like if a human was walking on sand, there's an imprint where the foot stepped. And these things they're made when a scientist fills that print up with rubber, and then it gets solid. And that's why this part of it is flat, because of course when you pour liquid into something, the surface of it is flat and it fills all the spaces. And then after it dries and hardens, the scientist can pull this out, and there's a model of the animal's footprint. So we could use this to make our own footprints, like if the animal was walking, or we can look at the details of the bottom of the animal's foot, but it doesn't show us the whole foot, okay? And the other thing I want to say is that the colors here were chosen by scientists. So this animal foot is not this color. This animal foot is definitely not this color. All right. And some of these, it shows just the whole foot. And for others, the pieces of the foot are very fragile because they're so thin. And so the black part on this one is the animal's foot, and the brown part is just a back that the scientist put on there so that it makes it stronger. So this brown part is not a part of this foot. Okay, so these are all really neat rubber feet that are rubber footprints that are going to help us learn about animals. All right, so animals all have different feet based on how they have evolved to move through the environment. We have feet that are very different from dogs and cats, and from horses, and definitely from birds. And the way we walk on our feet is it affects how we move. So I want to show you this, which I think is so cool. This picture shows a human foot, a dog foot, and a horse foot. And the bones that are in color here are all the same bones. They're just different shapes. So these bones here, this is the ankle. And because these bones are different lengths, it's in a slightly different position on the animal's leg. And that's why sometimes it looks like horses and dogs have legs that bend backwards, but really they're just standing on their legs a little differently than we are. I think pictures like this are really neat because it helps me understand how, even though we all look different, we're all pretty similar too. All right, so there are some fancy science words to describe how all of these animals walk on their feet. So we step on our whole foot from our heel up to our toes. Usually we stand like that. This picture shows this person standing a little bit on their tiptoes, but we walk on the whole bottom of our foot. And so that's called plantigrade. And I like to think about it like you're planting your whole foot on the ground. That's plantigrade. So a dog paw, they walk on sort of like it would be the equivalent of us walking on our tiptoes. And this is called digitigrade. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but digitigrade. And that's because they walk on their digits. Your fingers and toes, another word for them, are digits. So they're walking on their digits. They just walk on their tiptoes. And now an ungulate, which is a fancy word for a horse, they walk up on their hooves. And that's actually the equivalent of our toenails. So it will be like us walking on our very, very, very tiptoes. And they're ungulates, okay? So all of these also create a different footprint because different amounts of the feet are connecting with the ground. Very cool. All right, I'm going to show you some animal prints. And I'm going to show you some pictures of animals. And hopefully some of these are animals that you've seen around your neighborhood. All right, so the first two that I want to show you are pretty common. This one is one we actually hope not to see outside. This is the print of a house cat. All right. And so if it is a house cat that lives outside and doesn't really have a family, it's called a feral cat. And hopefully everybody's keeping their pet cats inside or out on a catio or out on a leash because it's safer for the cat and it's safer for all of the lizards and mammals and birds, all of those animals that get eaten by cats. So if you see a footprint like this, as a cat, because it has this central foot pad here, like a lot of mammals do, and it has toes. They happen to have 4 toes that connect with the ground. But the really cool thing about cats is that when they're walking, they keep their claws retracted. So when they're making footprints, you can't see their claws in the footprints, which is a really great way to identify that you're looking at a cat print. Now, if you are up in Wisconsin's North Woods or in more remote areas in the rest of the world, you might also see a bobcat track. And those look like these, but they're a little bit bigger. So up there, it is important also to check the size of the track that you're looking at. So if you find one that's, say, about this big, but that doesn't have these claws, then you might be looking at a bobcat track, and that is pretty darn cool. So I want to talk a little bit more about claws. So cats, when they're hunting, they will catch their prey with their claws. So they wait, they creep up as close as they can. They might make a quick run to grab the animal, or they might just jump on it. But when they grab it, it's usually with their paws, and then they go in and they kill it with their teeth. And so they need to keep their claws pretty sharp because they rely on them to eat. So that's part of the reason why they retract them. They also use their claws when they're climbing trees or when they are, they'll mark by scratching on things with their claws too. And that helps keep them nice and sharp. So cats need to protect their claws because they rely on them to catch food. Dogs, though, their claws are always out. And when dogs are hunting, usually they will run and they'll chase an animal until it gets tired. And then if you've ever seen a video of, say, wolves hunting, maybe deer or bison, they will usually lunge at the animal with their mouth and they will grab it with their teeth and maybe pull it down to the ground. And so they don't use their feet a lot when they're trying to kill an animal. It's more just to run fast after them. And so they have their claws out all the time, gives them great grip while they're running, and they don't have to worry about their claws getting dulled at all. And the really cool thing about this is that cheetahs actually keep their claws out all the time. And you might think, well, man, they're breaking the rule because they're a cat. Why are their claws not retractable? And actually, they're following the rule because, not that these guys are concerned about following or breaking rules, but scientists talk about that a little bit. They're following the rules too because they're actually they rely on their claws to help them run just like a dog because they run down their prey, they tire them out, they chase them. They're such fast runners, and so it's really neat that their claws act more like dog claws than cat claws because they run like wolves do. All right, I'm going to go peek over and check to see if we have any comments. Oh, Carl says hi. If you have any questions, type them in the comments and I'll answer them as I go. Okay, so this animal is a coyote track, and you can tell based partly on the size, also partly because the distance between this pad and these pads is greater than that over here. So cats, their pads are all much more, they're closer together, and dogs, they're a little bit more spread apart. Now, remember I said that dogs have claws that are visible. Mm-hmm. But the other thing we need to keep in mind is that we have a lot of pet dogs that go outside, right? And they range in size from a Chihuahua to a Mastiff. So dog paws can be very, very tiny or very, very big. And so when you're out and you're looking at tracks, if you see a dog track, you really have to think about whether or not it's likely to be a wild dog like a wolf, a coyote, or a fox, or somebody's pet dog. And I know that really experienced trackers do know that there are some differences between domestic and wild dogs and the way that their paws are shaped. But I've been trying to learn about tracks for a few years now, and I can't tell them apart. So I like to look at the rest of the clues in the environment to figure out whether or not I'm looking at a pet dog or a wild dog. And the first thing I think about is where we are. So if I am in a park in the city of Madison or, any other big city, and there's, human footprints all over the place, and the animal's footprint walks right alongside a set of human footprints, I might think that it could be a pet dog. But there are coyotes living in, or even if they don't live in, they cross through all of the Madison parks. There are coyotes living in Chicago, in Central Park in New York City. So coyotes especially are really, really good at living near humans. So just because you're in a human park doesn't mean that wild animals are living there too. So another thing that you can check out is the path of the animal. So usually wild animals look like they're moving more with a purpose. They travel in more straight lines, and they seem to travel like they don't swerve around quite as much. So that's another thing to look at. Our dogs are, they don't have to hunt for their food, right? So they can play a little more, they can go sniff things and explore. So they like to travel in a very, a little crazier path. I also like to look for scat, which is another word for poop. And if there is a lot of fur and bones in scat that's right near these tracks, that's more likely to be a wild animal. If it's, if it looks like a pet dog's poop, which is like brown Play-Doh, then it's more likely to be a pet dog's tracks. Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about dogs and cats. I said that in reverse. This is a cat and this is a dog, and how to tell whether you're looking at a dog or a cat. And we talked about how to tell if it's a wild animal or if it's someone's pet animal. Let's look at these. So dogs and cats are both digitigrade. So remember, they're walking up on their toes. They're walking on their tiptoes here. And that's how they make the small round track. All right. I'm going to peek over at the comments. So Matthew asks how to make a print of a track. This is really fun. I don't have a document that I can link to you, but it is really easy to find this out online. I know that we have, in the past, made prints with our animal tracks right in the sand. And then you can just take some plaster of Paris and pour it in there and let it solidify and pull it out, and you'll have a track. You can also do that with tracks you might find in nature. And there are some tips about how to get it to come out looking right and looking like a circle. Like if you take, like an oatmeal, like the cardboard container that oatmeal comes in, and you cut a little ring off of that, and then set that in the ground around the track. It'll make a nice circle when you pull the plaster up. But that's a really, really fun way to explore nature and bring some home with you so that you can look it up later or share it with your friends. You can be the teachers and the scientists. Super fun activity. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see, that's the only question right now. Send me more questions. That was good. Okay, so next I want to talk about this track. And this is one of my favorites, and it's so easy to find in neighborhoods and even cities. And this is a deer track, and this is the track of a white-tailed deer. A lot of the deer have very, very similar tracks. So elk and moose just have tracks that look like this, but much bigger. So a moose track would be about that big. They're huge. And of course, there's some smaller species of deer too that would have smaller prints. And this is, again, an ungulate hoof, and they have two toes though. Or actually they're cervids. They're not quite ungulates. But they have two toes, and I think their tracks look a little heart-shaped. So they sort of, they dip in right here, and they have this point up here. So if I were to flip it over, that's more what you think a heart would look like, the black parts of it. And deer tracks are cool because this pointy part here points in the direction that the deer was walking. So you can tell where the deer was going because these parts point in that direction. What else do I want to say about deer tracks? Deer have two little, I guess they're called dew claws, that they're higher up on their legs. So if the foot was right here and they're making the prints like this, their little dew claws would be back here. And if they're walking in deep mud or sand, sometimes you can see those prints behind it, which is kind of cool. What else? Does anyone have any questions about deer tracks? And he's looking for dinosaur tracks, and we often pretend deer tracks are dinosaur tracks. Colton says hi and that he loves watching nature videos. Hi, Colton. Thanks for watching. All right, so we have these cool deer tracks. What else do we have? I have a squirrel track. And squirrels, this is the back foot of a squirrel, a gray squirrel. And they actually have much bigger feet than I would expect based on their size. They are huge. And that might be to help them climb trees, help them jump and leap and grab. But they have really, really big back feet. And let's see. Oh, I have pictures of bunnies, not squirrels. We'll get to bunnies in a second. Rabbits. But these guys also have really long toes. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes here. And they, if we compare this to a cat, these pads here and this middle pad are much more spread out. Even more spread out than a dog track, given the size. It's really neat, I think, to compare all the different shapes in the feet and learn a little bit more about what their feet look like, because I don't spend a lot of time looking at squirrel feet when I'm just watching squirrels. But when I'm looking at their tracks, then I can really think about their feet, which is neat. Let's see. I have tracks from a snowshoe hare, and this is the back foot and this is the front foot, and my camera is having a lot of trouble with the white. So their feet they do change color. So this white color here was a good choice for them. They do have white fur in the winter. But these guys also have really, really, really long feet. And actually, I think this track should probably be wider. I'm curious about why it was so narrow. They have really long feet. And snowshoe hares are special because their feet are so huge that it helps them walk on the snow a little bit like snowshoes, keeps them from sinking in. And there's a few animals that have really big feet in proportion to their body size, and it's usually to help them walk on top of something. There's a bird called a jacana that looks a little bit like a chicken, like a body shape of a chicken, but its feet are, if the bird is this big, its feet are probably like this big in circumference. They're just enormous, and it helps them walk on lily pads. Snowshoe hares are another good example. Lynx also have really big feet compared to the size of their body to help them move through snow. And I want to show you something really neat about rabbit footprints. And so I'm going to show you, let's see, let's look at this one first. So this here is the shape that a rabbit's front and back feet make as they are running fast. And these two little ones here are the front feet, and these two larger ones are the back feet. And when you find them, there's a grouping like this, and then a space, and a grouping like this, and then another space, because they're jumping, they're running really fast. And I was surprised when I first started looking at tracks that these two in what looks like the front of it, because it's moving this way, are the back feet. And I was really confused about why the back feet would be at the front of this track. And it's actually all about how the animal moves its body when it's running. So here's a picture of a rabbit running fast. And you can see that their back legs, they swoop forward, and the front legs are pointing back here. So that's how the animal makes a track, oops, that looks like this, with the back feet in front of the front feet. And kiddos, it's really fun to move your body like that. It's really hard. So if next time you're outside, or if you have a long hallway in your house or something, or your apartment, try hopping along like a rabbit and swooping your back legs in front of your front legs. Definitely wear your stretchy pants. You'll need them. All right, so the other cool thing is that an animal's tracks, the way they're positioned, can change based on how fast the animal is moving. So before I said this was a rabbit moving fast, and they placed their front feet, they're not parallel like this. One front foot is in front of the other. And then their back feet, they are parallel. So they run like this, and they put one front foot down, then the other, and then both back feet spring up. Okay? That's how they make this sort of track. And they leap a long distance between the tracks, and then they put their feet down again. But when they're moving slower, like if they're just hopping slowly around your garden or in your yard, both of their front feet are next to each other, and both of their back feet are next to each other. And there's a much smaller gap between the footprints. So when you're looking at an animal track, look at the whole thing and try to figure out how fast the animal was moving, whether they were jumping or running. And also remember that the shape of the prints that the animals make might change depending on how they're moving their body. And here I have another picture showing how rabbits change, let's go this way, how their body moves as they're running. So this one, they're standing only on their front feet, and their back feet have just pushed off. Then they swoop those front feet forward, or their back feet forward, and get ready to push off again. It's really neat how they do that. And actually, larger animals move their feet like this too. So this is a picture of a mountain lion, or a puma, or a catamount. They have a lot of different names. This is a picture of a mountain lion walking. And for this one, sometimes when these animals walk, they will put their back feet directly where their front feet were, which is called a direct register walk. And so it might look like they only have 2 feet because their footprints are exactly in the other ones. But this animal, maybe it's walking in water, and that's sort of changing the way it's walking. But you can see all 4 feet. Well, this one has just left the ground, but they're all on the ground at the same time, and they're in a different space. So you would see all of these footprints at once on the ground. But here is one running. And it's making the same shape that rabbit was. Its back feet are swooping forward, its front feet are pushing back. And so the shape that the prints would make for this one is very different than this one. It's really neat to think about. All right, so we've looked at some mammal tracks, and it's already been a half an hour. How about we look at some bird tracks next? What do you think? So birds have they have different shaped feet than mammals, for sure. And the typical bird track you think of looks like this. There's 3 toes pointing forward and 1 toe pointing backward. And this right here is actually the leg that was caught in this print. So we've got 3 toes forward and 1 toe backward. And scientists have a lot of cool words to describe where all the toes are pointing for birds. So this one is a nisodactyl, and you don't have to remember these words. I just think they're really cool, and I think it's it's fun to know that there are words to describe almost anything we want to say. We just have to look them up. So this is a nisodactyl. They have 3 toes in the forward, 1 in the back. There's also zygodactyl, which is 2 toes forward, 2 toes back. Heterodactyl is the same thing, but the number for the toes. Scientists have numbered bird toes. So our big toe is number 1. Our second toe is number 2. Pinky toe is number 5. Birds are the same way, except they only have 4. And so for these two, it's the same shape, but the number of the toe is in a little different spot. And then there's some birds with like slightly webbed or fused toes, and even some that can move the position of their toes. They can switch forward and backwards. So those toes are really cool. So we said that this one was a nisodactyl, 3 forward and 1 back. And this is the foot of a pheasant, which is a bird that looks a little like a chicken. It was actually introduced to the United States. It's not found here naturally, but it is a cool bird and one that you could easily see if you're driving around in the country, pheasant. And this is the footprint of a woodpecker, and these are 2 feet here, and the red is just something holding the footprints together. That's not a part of the footprint. And this one is zygodactyl. They have 2 toes forward and 2 toes backwards. So that is this one, zygodactyl. And that 2 toes forward, 2 toes back really helps the woodpecker to grip onto the tree. Next, I want to talk about webbed feet. Oh no, where's my other webbed feet? Got it. Got my webbed foot, don't worry. So there are even words to describe the type of webbing birds have in their feet. So this foot is palmately webbed. Kind of like, who was here for our leaf lesson? The palmate veins. Humans like to talk about their hands, right? So we have palmate veins in a leaf where all the veins sort of start in the middle and then head out. And then palmate webbing is when all of the webbing comes out of the center and it's in between these toes up here, and there's just 1 toe pointing backward. And this is a wood duck's foot. It's this big. A mallard's foot would be a little bit bigger than this. That's the type of duck that is most common in like park ponds, a mallard. But this wood duck has this webbing in between its toes, just like this, to help it swim. So if there are any swimmers out there, you know, when you're swimming, you're doing freestyle or front crawl, you sort of want to cup your hands to help move the water a little bit better. That's exactly what webbed feet do for ducks. It helps them move more water so that they can be better swimmers. And when they move their foot forward in the water, they sort of close it like this so it's easy to move, and then they open up their foot when they paddle it back. Ducks are cool. I like them. All right, so then we have a few other types of webbing here. One that's topiopalmate and one that's semi-palmate, and the semi means not all the way, so that's not all the way webbed. But these ones here I want to talk about. These are called lobate feet. And I want everyone to say lobate. It's a word that sounds good in your mouth, or it feels good, lobate. And lobate feet, but they are really good for swimming. So I like to think about it as if you had little balls of Play-Doh on your fingers, and then you smush them like this so they're a little flattened. Like maybe you put your hand on the table and press down like this so they got flattened. And this is what lobate feet look like. And coots have these feet. These are also really common on our lakes. I don't have pictures of these birds. I'm sorry. That'll be a fun project to Google later. So these coot have lobate feet, and they are still pretty good for swimming because it helps to move more water, like you were cupping the water. But they're also really good for walking, because if anybody's ever watched a duck walk or a goose, they are a little waddly and they're not quite as agile on land as other birds are. And lobate feet are a little bit better for walking than fully webbed feet are. Okay. So I talked a lot about the shape of tracks. I want to share that there are so many field guides out there about tracks, and this is one of my favorites. It is the Elbrock Guide to Mammal Tracks and Sign, and they have one for birds too. But so when I go out and look for tracks, I do like to bring my phone to take pictures of them. And I usually put something to help me remember the size of the track. So I might put my chapstick next to it, or I might put my hand in the picture so that I can measure it later. You could also put a ruler in the picture if you want to be a super scientist. But this book is really neat because it has the tracks for all the animals, and they're the actual size of the animal track. So you can put this book right next to the track and say, hey, that's what I'm looking at. So it'd be really cool to check this out at your library, or get a copy if you want to, but I like using my library a lot. And this book also shows things like what it looks like when a hickory nut is eaten by a chipmunk, because all of these animals open nuts in slightly different ways. This is what it looks like when a mouse opens them. So I know we're not talking about signs like that right now, but that's another part of being a nature detective, and it's really, really fun. So know that these field guides exist and that you can get them at your library and check them out. There's also a lot of information about animal tracks online, so you can always Google what you're looking for and maybe find it. Okay, so we talked about field guides. We talked about looking at the whole track. So I want to talk about how tracks might change based on how the animal is moving. And usually when I do this in person with kids, we have snow on the ground. I like to plan this for winter. So it's really helpful if you can go outside and explore what your tracks look like when you change what you're doing. So you could do this in snow. You could do this in mud, maybe in sand. Another really easy way is to just take a bucket of water outside on a hot sunny day and run around in a driveway or on a sidewalk. Dip your feet in the water first and then make footprints with the water. And then just wait for them to dry, and you'll have a whole new place to make tracks on. So what I think is really fun to think about is so I'm gonna talk about a scenario, and then if you have a guess about what's happening in it, type it in the comments, and hopefully the lag won't be so much that it's frustrating. So let's pretend that you find two sets of human tracks on a beach, and they're walking next to each other, all right? And one of them is much smaller than the other one. So what do you think is going on there? Who can answer that question in the comments? One of the tracks is much smaller than the other one. What do you think's happening? So these tracks, they're walking next to each other along the beach. And they're walking in a pretty straight line. So it seems to me like they have a destination in mind. And as they're walking, one of the sets of tracks, the smaller set of tracks, disappears. But the larger set of tracks is now deeper in the sand. So as they continue walking, the tracks are pushing deeper into the sand. What do you think happened there? And Sherry answered an adult or a baby and a kid. Oh, and Colton said, it's like me and Daddy. Yes, Colton, you are right. So I was thinking about an adult and a kid walking next to each other. Definitely. And, in general, women have smaller feet than men. I have pretty big feet though. And in general, kids have smaller feet than adults. So those are generalizations that you can use to help you figure out what the tracks are doing. So if you find in an area where only white-tailed deer live, big deer tracks and small deer tracks, it could be an adult and a fawn, or depending on the size, it could be a male deer and a female deer. So you can learn a little bit about the animals themselves, not just that it was a deer, but whether it was an adult deer or a baby deer, and as they're walking. Oh, and so we have the second scenario that I was talking about is when the smaller set of tracks disappears and the larger set of tracks gets deeper. And someone suggested that an adult was carrying the kid. And that is totally true. So I was thinking that the kid was getting a piggyback ride on the adult's back. And so that's why the kid's feet disappear, because the adult picked it up and the kid is not walking anymore. But the adult is now, it weighs more than it used to because the kid's on its back. And so that's why they're pressing deeper into the sand. So if I'm using my deer example again, adult male deers, they can have the same size feet. But if it's a very mature adult male deer, it might weigh 50 pounds more than a younger adult male deer. And so if you're on mud or sand where the deer can really sink in based on their weight, you can look at how deep the tracks are and think a little bit about how heavy that animal might be. Okay, so now let's pretend that you found, let's say deer tracks, because that's fun. So you find deer tracks and they're walking along at a pretty steady pace. So all the tracks are spaced pretty evenly. And then there's a really big gap and there's a huge log that is across the path. And then all 4 feet land and then they keep walking again. What do you think happened in that gap in the middle where there is no tracks and there's that log? So I think it's really fun when I find an animal track. Oh, answer that in the comments. Sorry if that was unclear. I think it's really neat when I find animal tracks to not only figure out what the animal is and maybe how old it is, but what it was doing. So sometimes you might see a spot where the animal was walking and then all of a sudden there's lots of footprints in one area and they're all facing different directions and then it continues walking again. And that might be a spot where the animal stopped and sniffed and looked around. You might also find a spot where an animal sits down. I was out with a bunch of kids at Midvale Elementary and we found rabbit tracks. It was perfectly sitting and there was one tiny little poop right in the middle of the back feet. So the rabbit just let out one little poop and then kept going. And that was really interesting. So for the story I was talking about where the deer is walking and then there's that log, that was a spot where the deer jumped over the log. And so there was that big gap there. And you can also find places where, say if a feral cat was walking and leapt up into the air and there was nothing else around showing why they would. You know, for the deer example I gave, they were clearly jumping over the log. But if a cat was walking and they just leapt up into the air, they could have been chasing a bug or a bird and then landing. So it's really fun to look at animal tracks to find out what they're doing. So your homework is to go get a bucket of water and run around on your sidewalk, or if it's safe and if you're with a parent, if there's a store that's still closed and they have a big parking lot, you can make a lot of footprints there. Another thing I really like to do is if you have more than one person, you can have one person shut their eyes and the other one makes some tracks. And then that person who had their eyes shut has to guess how that person made those tracks. It's a really fun detective game to play. Okay, so we are going to do 8-minute notes. Colton guessed a deer jumping over the log too. Nice job, Colton. So we're going to do 8-minute notes next. And if you have any questions right now about animal tracks, type them in, because while we're working on 8-minute notes, I am going to answer questions. All right. And if you're watching this later on, ask questions too, because we'll come back and answer them. All right. So the first thing you need to do for 8-minute notes is to put your name on your paper, because we still want to remember that even if we're just at home. And then you want to write the date. So today is June 10th, 2020. So you can write June 10, 2020, or you can write 6-10-2020. Okay. And the next thing you want to do for 8-minute notes is to make a big plus sign in the middle of your paper so it divides it into 4 sections. Okay. So once you get that all set up, we're going to get started. And I want you all to remember that 8-minute notes is just to help you become a better writer and a better scientist. And so you don't have to worry about writing incomplete sentences or spelling things correctly, unless that's something you want to work on, okay? And don't get stressed out about the amount of time you have, because you can always go back later and write more. I'll never know. Okay, so for the first one, pick a box. I usually pick my top left, so that would be over here if I'm mirrored here. Pick one of your boxes, and you're going to have 2 minutes to write about something that you learned today during this lesson, okay? So ready, go. You have 2 minutes to write about something that you learned. I learned that I want to know a lot more about sizes and the shapes of feet and how they change as an animal gets older, so that I could, when I find a track, learn even more about the animals. And I'm going to go look over the questions. I see no questions in here. So type your questions if you have them, because we have only about 5 minutes left in this lesson. Let's see. We have about a minute left to write about something that you learned. I'm trying to think of a cool animal track story to share with you. I was canoeing on the Wisconsin River, and that day it was a really nice warm day, and we were watching all sorts of eagles eating fish on the edges of the river. Oh, and I'm just noticing that Colton says, thank you for teaching about the animals. Colton, you're welcome. I'm so glad you joined us today. It's nice hearing all of your questions. So we were on the Wisconsin River, and we were seeing all of these bald eagles eating fish on the sandbars. And we finally pulled our canoe over, and there were no eagles on the sandbar because we didn't want to disturb them. But I saw really huge footprints with really big claws out on the sandbar. And the footprints were probably about this big compared to my hand. And they had 3 toes going forward and 1 toe going backward, and a claw that was about this long on them. And it was really amazing to know that I was walking in the same spot that an eagle had walked in just a little bit earlier. That was a really cool animal track sighting for me. So Matthew in the comments. Oh, everybody stop wording on something you learned. That was 2 minutes. Next, we are going to write about something someone said. So it could be something I said, or it could be something that someone you're watching this video said. And if you're being careful about writing this, remember to put quotes, one at the front and one at the end of something someone said, and then write mom said, or dad said, or grandma said, okay? Or Miss Carolyn said, because my name is Miss Carolyn. So you have 2 minutes to write something that someone said. Ready, go. So Matthew in the comments says he might have seen bear tracks once, and that is cool. I have not seen, have I seen bear tracks? I don't think I've seen bear tracks. I have definitely seen bear poop. But I would love to see bear tracks. Bears have very wide and short feet. So this dog track here, I don't have a rubber bear track. This dog track is longer than it is wide. Bear tracks are very circular, and they're wider than they are long. And they can be really, really big. Let me see if I can find bear tracks in the back here. Let's look in my field guide, because I love a good field guide. Okay, so this is a brown or grizzly bear, and these tracks are at 50%. So this is the back foot of a grizzly bear, and it's half the size. So a real grizzly bear back foot track would be, you can't even see my foot, it would be that long. That's enormous. And this front foot of a grizzly bear, this is the little pad in the back, it would be also this big. That's huge. And it would take up more than this whole paper. That's big. That's really big. I've never seen grizzly bear poop either. I've never seen a grizzly bear. Okay, so you're all writing something that someone said, and I have completely lost track of time, so we're going to give you 30 more seconds. All right. Abby says her favorite tracks are puppies and kittens. I love puppy and kitten tracks too. I have 2 cats. Actually, do you want to see one of my cats right now? It's sleeping right on its cat tree right here, way up at the top. Oops, sorry. There we go. That's Jasper. And I have a leash for my cats. And we take them out in the snow sometimes. And I love their little tiny footprints in the snow. It makes me so happy. Okay, so that was 30 seconds to write about something someone said. Stop. Next, we're going to write about something you wonder. So you have 2 minutes to write about something you wonder. Pick a new box and start writing now. And writing about something you wonder is really important because being a scientist is all about asking questions and trying to find the answers to them. And you can either look them up in a book or online or in a scientific paper, or you can try to go and find the answers yourselves. So maybe your question is, I wonder what kind of animals live in my backyard, and maybe ones that I don't see. And so you could try and find that answer either by looking in your sandbox or your garden for footprints. Maybe you could set up a trail camera if you can borrow one or find one. And you could also set up something that's called a track station. So you could set out maybe a big tarp and put sand on it. Usually when you do this out in the wild, you would scrape up the ground to expose the dirt and make it really smooth so you can see who's stepping there. But you shouldn't do that in your backyard unless your parents say it's okay. But then you could see what animals walk across that and put their footprints on it. It's called a track station. So real scientists need to know what animal tracks look like so that they can figure out what animals are in an area. It's awesome. Okay, what else might I wonder? I wonder a lot about whether the tracks that I'm looking at and I'm identifying, whether I'm identifying them correctly. Because I love tracks and I think they're neat, but I'm still just learning about tracks. And I wonder how often I get it right. And I wonder how many tracks I'm walking by and not seeing, because animal tracks are, they're quiet, they're secret. You have to be a really good observer to be able to find them. Usually, if an animal is being noisy, it's easier to find than just looking for a little animal track. Okay, so you have 15 seconds left to write about something you wonder. Okay, if there's any more questions, we have about 2 minutes left for you to ask them. And I love questions. Okay, so stop writing about something you wonder, and now you're going to draw something. You could draw the way your foot looks when it's walking. So you can start drawing now if you want to. You have 2 minutes. I am going to hold up the cat print and the dog print in case anyone wants to draw these for their picture. You could draw a set of tracks on the ground and maybe have something happen in them, like the animal starts running or jumping, and then maybe you could ask someone who's with you to guess what the animal's doing. That would be fun. What else could you draw? Ooh, if you want to get really creative, you could take some paint and paint your hand or your foot and make your own footprint in your nature journal or on your paper that you're working on. That would be neat. I like doing that. And it tickles. Okay, so you have, I'm going to stop in 30 seconds, but you can keep drawing if you want to, because I know sometimes drawing takes a long time. So a few more seconds to keep drawing. Keep on going, keep on going. Remember to add the claws if you're drawing the dog, but don't add them if you're drawing the cat. Okay, so I'm going to stop, but you can keep drawing if you want to. I see no more questions in the comments, so I'm going to say thank you for joining or watching if you're watching later. This was really fun. I love talking about animal tracks. If you have suggestions for other lessons we should do, add them in the comments, because it's going to be a whole summer of lessons like this, and I want to make sure we're giving you the lessons you want. So if you're really curious about something, send us an email or toss it in the comments. Remember, registration for our Forces of Nature summer camp is open, so go check that out. And I want to just remind everybody that our programming is free so that it can be accessible to anyone with an internet connection. And we want to keep it that way. So if you have the means and you're enjoying these lessons, we're going to add a little comment about how to donate so you can support us and keep these coming. So all you kiddos out there, have some fun, go play with some water, make some footprints, and I'll see you next time. Bye.